Okay.
Okay. Several years ago, Joanne asked me if I would go up and talk about the history of Hat Creek, where George and Elsie Christian lived, because when I was a kid, they liked us kids, which was pretty exciting to have neighbors that would accept us, you know. And George and Elsie were wonderful people. George would come down and take us kids for an airplane ride, and they were just great people. So we kept talking about this year after year after year, and one day I said, let's just do a Hat Creek tour, because there are places that I hadn't been, like the monument where the three states intersect. It's like a half mile off the ranch, and I'd never been there, because you had to go down to Jordan's and go through their pasture. And so we started the Hat Creek tour. And we met at Joanne's, and she gave us some history on Hat Creek, and then we headed down the road, and we spent a Sunday afternoon, and we had a lot of fun. We did the next year we had plans for a third, but I had back surgery, so that canceled that. We're drizzling along, but there's so much history in Hat Creek. And Joanne talked about Mrs. Faulkner. When she lived out there, when they had the store, she hadn't been to Lust for 10 years. And she decided to go to town. And when she got back, people said, well, how did you enjoy your trip? And she said, don't know what the big deal is. There's way more going on out here than there is, which is amazing. So the story of the Bryant family, or the Crowfoot family, intrigued me. And when they did the book of Sister, when they talked about the fire and how that family survived and held together, there was a map in there with in the 20s and 30s where those places were. And so I thought it'd be interesting when Joanne asked me to do that, to go back and try to find the history on those, which I'm kind of an obsessive compulsive reader of history. Roy said, are you going to do anything? No, I'm reading. You know, it was a good excuse. Well, there was just way too much history to just give you a shotgun effect. So I kind of picked out a few different families. And it's kind of like, if you guys have ever, we were raised on football. So one of my favorite things is John Madden's description of this and this and this, and how this goes over here and this goes over here. And then you get out to Drew Duncan and you've got the whole works. Well, these places have been switched from place to place, they added here, shifted here, people, and it's just really interesting to follow that trail. So the first one I'm going to do is on Jacob Mill. He was raised in Germany. And at the age of 21, he was granted an extension for military service by the country because he was too small. And their theory was if they gave him that extension, they would potentially grow and be a little bit more serviceable to have a military career. Well, the country at that time was in a very difficult state. So he decided to come to America. He had 3 brothers that wanted to come, but they didn't have the money for that. So he came. And once in America, he worked his way to Cheyenne. He herded cattle around Cheyenne. And then he drove sheep from Oregon to Wyoming. Can't fathom that. So then he decided it was time that he settled down, and he married a woman from Iowa, but didn't explain to him, you know, in the story how he happened to get the gal from Iowa. But anyway, her name was Philipina, and they were married. And then when he was freighting, he had found a place along Sage Creek, so that's where they moved to. They had 3 children, David and William and George Mill. And their daughter of Bertha Boyd, and the other one was Christina Cook. And Christina Cook married Edmund A. There's 3 Edmund Cooks. But the first one was Edmund A. And that's who Christina Cook married. And they were married in 1905. And then in 1926, he passed away. And then she remarried again later to a Struby. And her first son by her first marriage was Edmund Mill Cook. And then the daughter ended up marrying a Struby as well as, and they were married in 31, and so was Christina married to Martin Struby. So it kind of starts doubling around with different families because a lot of times one spouse or the other would pass away and they would remarry. And he was well known, and they referred to him as one of the most well-known and best-liked stockmen in the area. Jakey and Tina were, the Mill Ranch has continued in the family. It is still now is ran by their Jakey Mill's great-grandson, Jay Freed. So the next one is Edmund Alfred Cook and Christina Mill Cook. And Edmund, his history was interesting because he was a stagecoach driver. He was a veteran of the Spanish-American War. He served in the Philippine Islands under General MacArthur. And then he served 3 years after that in the Philippines. He had a short tour in China and Japan, which is amazing to me. And they were the children, the parents of 2 children, Edmund Mill Cook and then the Helen Cook Struby. And Edmund A. Cook passed away February 3, 1946. Then, when I was a kid, I could never understand how come the Seaman Hills were behind us, because we knew all these seamen who lived to the east of us in Nebraska. That just does not make sense. Well, come to find out, his grandfather, Sam Seaman, when he was raised, when he was 17 months old, his mother passed away. And they sent him to live with his dad's sister. And she was from Ontario, Canada. They moved to New York. And he worked for a silk importer. And that seems like a strange background to want to go west if you're in the silk business. But anyway, he ended up coming out here. And when he got out here, he went to work for the Western Livestock Company. And that was ran by Frank Lusk. And they had holdings on the Esbar Hill, the Esbar Ranch, Indian Creek, Hat Creek. They had land up by Douglas and by Cheyenne. And when they were dissolving that ranch, Frank Lusk still was the manager. And he let him buy some mares from that ranch, gave him the Clawhammer brand, and he was also able to buy a Percheron stud that had been shipped here from France, which at that time, having that kind of livestock shipped over here, seems incredible. But then he ended up with 500 head of horses. And he started out on the south side of the Seaman Hills. And then he ended up having a homestead out by Meigs. And Hans Ming actually worked for him. And then he was buying homesteads down around the Wyoming, Nebraska line, which is north of Harrison, about 28 miles. And Hans Ming would go down there in the summer, or in the winter. They wintered the cattle there, and then they moved them back out to south of Redbird. They didn't say how far south of Redbird, but south of Redbird. And then they eventually sold that homestead and moved back down to the Nebraska place. And their son was Jasper Ollie Seaman, and he married Hazel Whitman, who was raised at the Whitman right there at the corner of Nebraska and Wyoming. And their daughter, Alita, married Keith Zimmerman. Shirley Ladke was a daughter, and Jeannie McKelvey was a daughter. And now their great-grandchildren, Farron and Wanda Cross, live there. And so it's just amazing how those families keep moving around, and, you know, and other families keep coming into the picture. So that's a little shot of Hat Creek. Any questions? Okay.
Thank you.